This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
The road to Delphi stretched before King Basilius like a serpent, winding through lush forests and over craggy hills. The weight of his crown seemed to grow heavier with each step, his mind a whirlwind of worries for Arcadia's future. The rustling leaves whispered secrets he couldn't quite catch, and the crunch of gravel beneath his feet echoed his racing heartbeat. As Basilius approached the ancient city, a hush fell over him. Pilgrims from distant lands moved about with reverent steps, their eyes wide with wonder and anticipation. The air thrummed with an energy that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Towering marble columns of the temple pierced the sky, dwarfing all who stood before them. A high priestess, her robes as pure as freshly fallen snow, appeared at the temple entrance. Her eyes, deep pools of ancient wisdom, seemed to look right through Basilius. With a slight nod, she beckoned him to follow. The king's palms grew sweaty as they walked through winding corridors, the soft echo of their footsteps mingling with whispered prayers. The sacred chamber engulfed Basilius in a world of mystery. Tendrils of incense curled through the air, their heady aroma making his head spin. Shadows danced on the walls, alive with secrets untold. The atmosphere was thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. When the oracle spoke, her voice sent chills down Basilius's spine. Each word of the prophecy fell like a hammer blow. His daughters, stolen away, adultery with his own wife, a foreign prince on his throne. Basilius felt the ground shift beneath his feet, his world tilting on its axis. Stumbling from the temple, the king squinted in the bright Delphic sun. Its cheerful rays seemed to mock the darkness that now clouded his vision of the future. The journey back to Arcadia stretched before him, each step taking him closer to a fate he desperately wished to avoid. As Basilius traveled, the lush landscape of his kingdom took on a sinister air. Every rustling leaf could be hiding a kidnapper, every shadowy grove concealing a usurper. His mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Upon returning to his palace, Basilius felt a momentary sense of relief wash over him, but the weight of the prophecy pressed down, demanding action. With a heavy heart, he summoned Philonax, his most trusted advisor. In the privacy of the king's chambers, Basilius poured out the details of the prophecy. His words tumbled forth, raw and unfiltered. Philonax listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. As night fell, king and advisor debated long and hard. They examined each possible course of action, weighing the consequences as carefully as a merchant weighing gold. The candlelight flickered low, casting long shadows across the room as they spoke of love, duty, and the fickle nature of fate. With the first light of dawn creeping through the windows, Basilius made his decision. It was a choice that would change everything, setting in motion events that would test the very foundations of Arcadian society. The king's face was etched with determination as he shared his plan with Philonax, his voice barely above a whisper. As Basilius finished outlining his strategy, a chill ran down his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that despite his best efforts, the wheels of fate had already been set in motion. With trembling hands, he reached for the royal seal, ready to put his plan into action. But as he pressed the seal to the parchment, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the candles, plunging the room into darkness. In that moment of blindness, Basilius felt the full weight of his decision pressing down upon him. What if in trying to avoid his fate, he was rushing headlong into it? King Basilius stood resolute, his jaw set with determination. He was ready to defy the prophecy that haunted him, no matter the cost. The air in the palace was thick with tension, like a storm about to break. Basilius's voice, usually measured and calm, now rang out with an edge of desperation as he announced his plan to retreat from public life. The words echoed off the marble walls, sending ripples of shock through the assembled courtiers. "We shall build 2 lodges," he declared, his eyes blazing with a mix of fear and determination. "Deep in the heart of Arcadia, far from prying eyes and wagging tongues." As the king's words sank in, the palace erupted into a flurry of activity. The sound of hammering and sawing filled the air, punctuated by the shouts of workers and the nervous whispers of servants. The very foundations of Arcadian society seemed to tremble with each blow of the carpenter's hammer. In the royal chambers, Basilius gathered his family. Queen Ganesia's eyes widened with surprise, her regal composure slipping for a moment as she grasped the magnitude of her husband's decision. Philoclea, gentle and soft-spoken, let out a small gasp, her delicate features etched with concern. In contrast, the spirited Pamela's eyes flashed with a mixture of excitement and defiance, her mind already racing with thoughts of adventure. "But father," Philoclea protested, her voice barely above a whisper, "what of our duties to the people?" Basilius sighed heavily, the weight of his decision evident in the slump of his shoulders. He reached out to cup his daughter's cheek, his calloused hand a stark contrast to her smooth skin. "My dear," he said softly, "sometimes we must make difficult choices to protect those we love." As the royal family began to pack, the palace buzzed with frenzied activity. Servants scurried about like ants, their arms laden with trunks and parcels. The air was thick with a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty, like the calm before a storm. In a move that raised eyebrows among the courtiers, Basilius appointed the loyal but simple-minded Demetus as Pamela's guardian. Demetus, with his ruddy cheeks and perpetually confused expression, seemed an odd choice for such an important role. His wife Miso, sharp-tongued and quick to anger, and their daughter Mopsa, as simple as her father, completed the unlikely trio of guardians. Word of the royal family's departure spread like wildfire through Arcadia. In taverns and marketplaces, on street corners and in noble houses, tongues wagged with wild theories. Some whispered of impending war, others of a terrible curse. The air crackled with tension, like dry kindling waiting for a spark. Philonax, left to manage the kingdom's affairs, found himself in a precarious position. The loyal advisor's brow furrowed as he worked tirelessly to maintain order. His voice, usually calm and measured, grew hoarse from countless speeches and reassurances to an increasingly restless populace. On the day of their departure, the royal procession wound its way through the city streets like a glittering serpent. Citizens lined the roads, their faces a sea of emotions, curiosity, concern, and even fear. Children perched on their parents' shoulders, straining for a glimpse of their beloved rulers. As they passed through the city gates, the familiar skyline of Arcadia began to recede. Philoclea cast a longing glance back at the only home she had ever known, her heart heavy with the weight of the unknown. The spires of the palace, once a symbol of stability and power, now seemed fragile and distant, like a fading dream. Pamela, by contrast, sat tall in her saddle, her eyes fixed on the horizon and the adventure that lay ahead. The wind whipped through her hair, carrying with it the scent of possibility and change. Basilius rode at the head of the procession, his back straight and his gaze unwavering. But beneath his stoic exterior, a storm of emotions raged. Relief at escaping the prophecy's reach mingled with trepidation about the uncertain future. As the comfortable familiarity of the palace faded into the distance, replaced by the wild beauty of the Arcadian countryside, Basilius clung to the hope that this drastic measure would be enough to change the course of fate. The road ahead stretched out before them, a blank canvas upon which their new life would be painted, for better or for worse. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, a sense of unease settled over the royal party. They were venturing into the unknown, leaving behind the safety and comfort of their old lives. Little did they know that fate had other plans in store. For even as they journeyed towards their secluded lodges, two foreign princes were making their way to Arcadia. Pericles of Macedon and Musidorus of Thessalia approached, their hearts brimming with anticipation, unaware of the turmoil that awaited them in this land of myth and beauty. As night fell, the paths of royalty and adventure were set to collide, promising a future filled with mystery, passion, and danger. The foreign princes, Pericles of Macedon and Musidorus of Thessalia, arrived in Arcadia, their hearts brimming with anticipation. Their journey had been marked by a series of thrilling adventures, each step bringing them closer to a land of myth and beauty. As they crested the final hill, the verdant valleys of Arcadia unfurled before them like a lush green carpet. The air was thick with the scent of wildflowers and possibility. Pericles inhaled deeply, his chest swelling with excitement. Beside him, Musidorus's eyes sparkled with wonder. "Can you feel it, cousin?" Pericles whispered, his voice barely audible over the gentle rustling of leaves. "There's magic in this air." Musidorus nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Indeed, it's as if the very land is alive with secrets." As they wandered through sun-dappled glades and alongside babbling brooks, their ears caught whispers of the legendary Arcadian princesses. Each tale was more enchanting than the last, painting vivid pictures of beauty and grace that set the prince's imaginations ablaze. One balmy evening, as they sat by a crackling campfire, Pericles voiced the thought that had been dancing on the edge of his mind. "What if we could meet these fabled beauties?" Musidorus leaned forward, firelight flickering across his face. "A tempting idea, cousin. But how?" Their minds raced with possibilities, each more daring than the last. As the moon rose high in the sky, casting silver light across the land, they hatched their audacious plan. Pericles, his heart already fluttering at the mere thought of Philoclea, decided to don the guise of an Amazon warrior. He chose the name Zelmane, savoring the way it rolled off his tongue like honey. With painstaking attention to detail, he crafted an elaborate costume. Each piece of armor was a work of art, from the intricately etched breastplate to the supple leather greaves. For days, Pericles immersed himself in his new identity. He practiced walking with a feminine gait, his steps light and graceful. He softened his voice, modulating its pitch and cadence, until it was as smooth as silk. At night he dreamed of Philoclea, her imagined beauty a siren call that echoed through his slumber. Meanwhile, Musidorus, equally captivated by tales of Pamela's elegance, chose a different path. He decided to disguise himself as a humble shepherd, adopting the name Dorus. With hands more accustomed to wielding swords than shears, he fashioned simple garments from rough cloth. The coarse fabric chafed against his skin, a constant reminder of the life he was leaving behind. Musidorus threw himself into learning the art of shepherding with fierce determination. He spent countless hours observing local shepherds, noting how they guided their flocks with gentle commands and well-placed crooks. The pungent smell of lanolin and fresh grass became his new perfume, the bleating of sheep a constant melody in his ears. As days turned to weeks, the two princes became fully immersed in their new identities. They crafted elaborate backstories, weaving tales of adventure and misfortune that would explain their presence in Arcadia. Like master thespians preparing for the performance of a lifetime, they honed their new personas, each critique and suggestion bringing them closer to perfection. The anticipation built within them like a gathering storm. Every sunrise brought them closer to the moment of truth, every sunset a reminder of the risks they were taking. The weight of their deception hung heavy on their shoulders, but the promise of love and adventure spurred them onward. Finally, with their transformations complete, Pericles and Musidorus stood at the edge of the forest, gazing towards the royal lodges nestled in the distance. The morning mist clung to the ground, wrapping around their ankles like tendrils of fate. The air was thick with tension, charged with the electricity of impending change. Pericles adjusted his Amazon armor, the unfamiliar weight both a burden and a thrill. The cool metal pressed against his skin, a constant reminder of the lie he was about to live. Beside him, Musidorus gripped his shepherd's crook, his knuckles white with tension. The rough wood bit into his palms, grounding him in his new reality. They exchanged a final look, years of friendship and shared adventures passing between them in a single glance. In that moment, they were no longer princes, but two souls on the brink of a grand adventure. With hearts pounding and minds focused on the challenges ahead, they took their first steps toward the secluded retreat. The very air seemed to shimmer with possibility as they moved forward, their futures balanced on the edge of this audacious scheme. As they approached the royal lodges, the world around them seemed to hold its breath. The birds fell silent, the wind died down, and even the sun seemed to pause in its journey across the sky. Pericles and Musidorus steeled themselves for what lay ahead, knowing that their very destinies hung in the balance of this daring deception. Just as they were about to step out of the forest's protective embrace, a horn sounded in the distance. The clear, piercing note cut through the air like a knife, shattering the moment of anticipation. Pericles and Musidorus froze, their hearts racing. Was this the signal for their grand entrance, or had their plan been discovered before it even began? The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and possibility as Zelmane strode through the palace gates. Heads turned, whispers erupted, and the very foundations of court life seemed to tremble with anticipation. King Basilius's eyes widened, taking in the warrior's graceful movements and barely concealed strength. Queen Gynecia's gaze lingered, a spark of recognition and desire kindling in her shrewd eyes. Philoclea, the younger princess, watched from a balcony, her delicate fingers gripping the stone railing. Her blue eyes narrowed, curiosity warring with caution as she observed the newcomer. Zelmane moved with effortless poise, each step a dance between strength and femininity. As days passed, the ice in Philoclea's heart began to melt, thawed by Zelmane's quick wit and charming manner. Their conversations flowed like honey, sweet and unhurried, each word drawing them closer. Meanwhile, beyond the palace walls, Musidorus embraced his role as the shepherd Doris. The pungent smell of hay and earth clung to his clothes as he tended to bleating sheep and lowing cattle. His eyes constantly sought glimpses of Pamela, her beauty outshining even the radiant sun breaking through storm clouds. His heart thundered in his chest whenever she passed, oblivious to the effect she had on the humble shepherd. As crimson and gold leaves carpeted the palace grounds, both princes found themselves tumbling headlong into love. Pericles wrestled with his disguise, his true feelings threatening to burst forth like a river in spring flood. Every shared moment with Philoclea was bittersweet, joy and torment intertwined. Her laughter like silver bells both delighted and pained him, knowing the deception that lay between them. Musidorus seized every opportunity to showcase his hidden depths to Pamela. As he worked, poetry flowed from his lips, carried on the breeze to where she sat reading beneath an ancient oak. Its gnarled branches seemed to lean in, as if the tree itself was captivated by his words. Slowly, like the changing seasons, Pamela's admiration for the shepherd began to blossom. The princesses, unaware of their suitors' true identities, found their own hearts opening to the possibility of love. Philoclea's eyes sparkled with newfound life, her laughter ringing out more frequently when Zelmane was near. Pamela, usually as aloof as a mountain peak, found herself drawn to Doris's quiet strength and wisdom, like a moth to a flame. But love, like a rose, comes with thorns. King Basilius, his crown sitting askew on his graying head, developed an infatuation with the disguised Pericles. His clumsy attempts at courtship were as graceful as a bear attempting a minuet, leaving Pericles in a constant state of discomfort. The prince's heart raced with panic each time the king's gaze lingered too long, or his hand reached out in a misguided gesture of affection. Queen Gynecia, her eyes sharp as a hawk's, suspected Zelmane's true nature. Rather than exposing the deception, she found herself drawn to the handsome youth beneath the disguise. Her gaze smoldered during court gatherings, rekindling a passion she thought long extinguished. The air crackled with tension whenever she and Zelmane occupied the same space, leaving the disguised prince feeling like a rabbit caught in a snare. This tangled web of affections created an atmosphere both tense and comical in the royal lodges. Pericles felt like a tightrope walker suspended over a pit of hungry crocodiles, precariously balancing the attentions of the entire royal family while trying to win Philoclea's heart. Every conversation became an intricate dance, every gesture a calculated risk. Laughter and whispers echoed through the palace halls, secrets hanging in the air like morning mist. The autumn days grew shorter, mirroring the shrinking space between hearts drawn together by love and deception. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of lavender and gold, Pericles found himself caught in a crossfire of longing gazes. Basilius's clumsy adoration, Gynecia's knowing desire, and Philoclea's innocent affection all converged on the disguised prince, threatening to shatter the carefully constructed facade. Pericles' heart pounded, knowing this delicate balance couldn't last forever. Yet he found himself unable to break free from the sweet trap of love, even as the weight of his deception grew heavier with each passing day. As night fell, cloaking the palace in shadows, A sense of foreboding settled over Pericles. How long could this charade continue before the truth came crashing down like a house of cards? Little did he know, as he retired to his chambers that night, that the coming days would test not only his resolve, but the very foundations of love and loyalty in the Arcadian court. The peaceful countryside masked an intricate web of emotions and intentions that was steadily weaving itself among the inhabitants, threatening to ensnare them all in its unforgiving threads. Days melted into weeks in the Arcadian retreat, transforming the landscape of relationships. The peaceful countryside masked an intricate web of emotions and intentions that was steadily weaving itself among the inhabitants. The sun-drenched meadows and whispering forests of Arcadia belied the storm brewing beneath the surface. Demetus, the gruff guardian of the fair Pamela, felt the first stirrings of unease. His weathered hands, calloused from years of labor, clenched and unclenched as he watched Doris, the newcomer, draw ever closer to his charge. "Doris!" Demetus's voice cracked like thunder across the tranquil fields. "The flock needs tending in the far meadow. Get to it, boy." Doris, shoulders slumping under the weight of yet another arduous task, trudged off. The scent of crushed grass rose with each heavy step, mingling with the bitter taste of frustration on his tongue. Behind him, Pamela's sympathetic gaze burned like a brand between his shoulder blades. Meanwhile, Mopsa, Demetus's daughter, added fuel to the fire of intrigue. Her heart fluttered like a trapped butterfly whenever Doris passed by, her cheeks flushing a deep crimson that rivaled the setting sun. This schoolgirl infatuation complicated Musidorus's carefully laid plans, forcing him to navigate an emotional minefield with each interaction. In the royal quarters, a different kind of tension simmered. King Basilius, his crown sitting askew on his graying head, threw himself into planning elaborate hunting expeditions. His eyes gleamed with boyish excitement as he imagined impressing Zelmane with his regal prowess. "My dear Zelmane," he proclaimed, puffing out his chest like a proud rooster. "Wait until you see the magnificent stag I've spotted in the royal forest. We shall hunt it together." Queen Ganesha, her lips pressed into a thin line, sought out quieter moments with Zelmane. In secluded corners of the palace gardens, where the air hung heavy with the sweet scent of roses, she cornered the Amazon. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, seemed to pierce through Zelmane's disguise. "There's something about you," Ganesha murmured, her voice low and intense. "Something that doesn't quite fit. Who are you really, Zelmane?" For Pericles, hidden beneath Zelmane's feminine attire, these encounters were like walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. Every word, every gesture had to be carefully measured, lest he reveal his true identity. The physical discomfort of his disguise, the pinching shoes, the restrictive corsets, was nothing compared to the emotional toll of deceiving Philoclea, the object of his true affections. In stolen moments with Philoclea, Pericles felt his heart soar and sink in equal measure. Her gentle smiles and soft words were like balm to his troubled soul. Yet each tender moment was tainted by the knowledge of his deception. As they walked arm in arm through blooming meadows, the weight of his secret hung between them like an invisible wall, as tangible as the warm breeze that ruffled their hair. Musidorus, too, found himself caught in a web of his own making. Unused to the rigors of a shepherd's life, his hands grew calloused and his muscles ached from the daily toil. Yet he persevered, driven by his desire to be near Pamela. In quiet moments, as he tended the flock under the warm Arcadian sun, he would catch sight of her in the distance, a vision of grace and beauty that made his heart skip a beat and his breath catch in his throat. But as the days wore on, the strain of maintaining their elaborate charade began to take its toll on both princes. Pericles found himself jumping at shadows, his nerves frayed like old rope. Musidorus's dreams were haunted by visions of angry mobs, his true identity revealed, waking him in cold sweats that left him trembling in the dark. The air in Arcadia grew thick with unspoken truths and mounting suspicions. Like a pot left too long on the fire, the situation threatened to boil over at any moment. The princes exchanged worried glances, knowing that they could not maintain their deception indefinitely. Yet the thought of revealing their true identities filled them with dread, for they knew not what consequences such a revelation might bring. As the sun set on another day in Arcadia, casting long shadows across the pastoral landscape, Pyrocles and Musidorus found themselves at a crossroads. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, fraught with potential heartbreak and danger. Yet to turn back now seemed impossible, for their hearts were irrevocably entwined with those of Philoclea and Pamela. With heavy hearts and troubled minds, they realized that they were caught in a trap of their own making, with no clear way out. The weight of their deception pressed down on them like a physical force, threatening to crush them beneath its burden. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle in the velvet sky, a new shadow crept across the land. In a distant corner of Arcadia, a figure moved with purpose through the darkness. Cecropia, the ambitious sister-in-law of King Basilius, her eyes glinting with malice, set her plans in motion. The tranquil facade of Arcadia was about to be shattered, and the lives of all within would never be the same again. Cecropia, the ambitious and cunning sister-in-law of King Basilius, had long harbored resentment over her diminished status in the Arcadian court. As the royal family retreated into seclusion, she saw an opportunity to advance her own agenda and seize power for herself. The night air hung heavy with anticipation, thick and oppressive like a woolen blanket. Cecropia's heart raced as she gathered her loyal followers, their whispers carried on the breeze, a soft counterpoint to the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves. The moon, a thin crescent, offered little light as they crept towards the royal lodges. Shadows among shadows. The smell of damp earth and night-blooming jasmine filled Cecropia's nostrils as she signaled the attack. With practiced precision, her forces struck swiftly. The minimal security, lulled into complacency by months of quiet, fell quickly. Shouts of alarm pierced the night, followed by the clash of steel and the thud of bodies hitting the ground. Confusion reigned as sleep-addled courtiers stumbled from their beds, only to be overwhelmed by the intruders. In the chaos, Cecropia's true targets emerged: Philoclea and Pamela, the royal princesses, and the mysterious Amazon warrior known as Zelmane. The kidnappers' hearts raced with a mix of fear and exhilaration as they seized their prizes, bundling them away like precious cargo. The princesses' muffled cries and Zelmane's fierce struggles only fueled their determination. As quickly as they had come, the raiders vanished into the night, leaving behind a scene of devastation. Torn tapestries fluttered in the breeze, and overturned furniture littered the floors. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke from knocked-over candles and the metallic tang of spilled blood. Dawn broke over Arcadia, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold that belied the turmoil below. As the full extent of the kidnapping became clear, King Basilius paced his chambers like a caged lion. His face, usually so composed, was etched with lines of worry and fear. The prophecy that had driven him to seclude his family now seemed to mock him, its first part seemingly fulfilled. "We must act now." Queen Ganesha's voice cut through the king's panicked muttering. Her eyes flashed with determination, a stark contrast to her husband's despair. "This has Cecropia's mark all over it. She's always coveted your throne, Basilius." In a nearby glade, Musidorus stood frozen, his shepherd's disguise suddenly feeling like a prison. His heart ached to rush to the aid of his cousin Pyrocles and the princesses, but to do so would reveal his true identity. The conflict tore at him, duty warring with desire. He clenched his fists, feeling the rough calluses of his disguise, a constant reminder of his deception. Miles away in Cecropia's fortress, the captives found themselves in a gilded cage. Luxurious chambers with silk hangings and plush furnishings couldn't mask the cold reality of their imprisonment. Separated from each other, each prisoner grappled with their own fears and uncertainties. Pyrocles, still maintaining his disguise as the Amazon Zelmane, felt the weight of his deception more keenly than ever. Every glance from a guard, every question from a servant, felt like a potential unraveling of his carefully constructed persona. He paced his chamber like a caged tiger, muscles coiled with tension, ready to spring at the slightest opportunity. The soft swish of his skirts against the stone floor was a constant reminder of his precarious position. Philoclea and Pamela, though apart, shared a silent determination. They were princesses of Arcadia, daughters of Basilius and Ganesha. They would not be broken by this ordeal. In the privacy of their chambers, they each began to plot, searching for weaknesses in their captor's defenses. Philoclea ran her fingers along the intricate carvings of her bedpost, mind racing with possibilities, while Pamela tested the strength of her window's iron bars, the cool metal unyielding beneath her touch. Cecropia, flushed with the success of her audacious plan, revealed her ultimate goal to her captives. Her voice dripped with honey-coated venom as she spoke of forcing one of the princesses to marry her son Amphialus. "A union," she purred, "that will secure our rightful place on the Arcadian throne." The words hung in the air, heavy with threat and promise. As night fell once more, the castle buzzed with tension. The captives, each in their own way, began to formulate plans for escape. Meanwhile, Pericles grappled not only with thoughts of freedom, but with the increasing difficulty of maintaining his Amazon disguise under such close scrutiny. The stage was set for a battle of wits and wills, with the fate of Arcadia hanging in the balance. Just as the moon reached its zenith, casting long shadows across the fortress walls, a commotion erupted at the gates. The sound of hoofbeats echoed through the stone corridors, growing louder with each passing moment. Guards rushed to their posts, weapons at the ready. In her chamber, Cecropia's eyes narrowed as she peered out the window, her triumphant smile fading as she recognized the approaching figure. Her son, Amphialus, had returned unexpectedly, and the look on his face promised trouble. Amphialus, the renowned knight and son of Cecropia, returned to his mother's castle with a sense of unease. The fortress stood on high alert, its walls bristling with an unusual tension that set his nerves on edge. The air hung heavy with foreboding as Amphialus strode through the familiar corridors. Whispers clung to the shadows like cobwebs, and furtive glances darted away from his questioning gaze. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a warning drum of impending trouble. As he turned a corner, the sight that greeted him stole the breath from his lungs. There, in a chamber never meant for such a purpose, stood the kidnapped princesses and the Amazon Zelmane. Their eyes, wide with fear and defiance, bore into him, accusing and pleading all at once. Before he could process this shocking revelation, his mother materialized beside him. Cecropia's presence was like a chill wind, her ambition a palpable force that seemed to suck the warmth from the room. "My dear Amphialus," she purred, her voice a silken caress that belied the steel beneath. "Our path to the Arcadian throne lies before us. Choose one of these princesses as your bride, and we shall rule together." Her words hung in the air like a poisoned apple, tempting and deadly. Amphialus felt as if he stood on the edge of a great chasm, the ground crumbling beneath his feet. His mother's plan tugged at him like a current, threatening to sweep away everything he thought he knew about honor and righteousness. With each reluctant step toward the captive's chambers, Amphialus felt the weight of his choices bearing down upon him. But as he entered the room, his eyes fell upon Philoclea, and the world tilted on its axis. Her beauty struck him with the force of a thunderbolt, illuminating the darkness that had settled in his soul. Despite the dire circumstances, he found himself drawn to her, an inexorable pull that defied reason or explanation. In the days that followed, Amphialus attempted to court Philoclea with the desperation of a man grasping at straws in a storm-tossed sea. His words, once so sure and confident, now stumbled and tripped over themselves in her presence. But Philoclea remained unmoved, her heart a fortress he could not breach. Her eyes, when they met his, held not the warmth he craved, but a cold determination that spoke volumes of her unwavering love for Zelmane. Each rejection was a dagger to his heart, twisting deeper with every passing day. As his frustration mounted, so did the suffocating weight of his actions. Shame and regret cloaked him like a second skin until he could bear it no longer. With a voice that shook with barely contained emotion, Amphialus confronted his mother. "Mother, what we're doing, it's not right. These women are not pawns in our game." But Cecropia stood unmoved, her ambition a raging inferno that threatened to consume all in its path. Her words, sharp as daggers, urged him to take more decisive action. Amphialus felt the noose of expectation tightening around his neck, choking the last vestiges of his moral resolve. As if to compound his troubles, Whispers of the kidnapping began to spread beyond the castle walls. Like wildfire in a drought-stricken forest, the news raced across the land. Amphialus knew in his heart that a rescue attempt was inevitable, the thought filling him with a mixture of dread and relief. With a heavy heart, he began to prepare the castle defenses. The once peaceful halls now echoed with the clang of weapons and the shouts of men preparing for battle. Each fortification felt like another bar in the cage of his own making, the weight of his choices pressing down upon him with every passing moment. As tensions rose both within and without the castle walls, Amphialus found himself caught in a maelstrom of conflicting loyalties and desires. His newfound feelings for Philoclea bloomed like a flower in the desert of his conscience, while his duty to his mother weighed upon him like chains. And through it all, his own sense of right and wrong cried out, a voice growing ever louder in the tumult of his mind. Standing atop the castle walls, Amphialus gazed out at the land that would soon become a battlefield. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of blood and fire, a fitting backdrop to the turmoil in his heart. He was a man divided, torn between love and duty, honor and ambition. As night fell, bringing with it a suffocating stillness, Amphialus made his way back to his chambers. But as he reached for the door, a muffled sound caught his attention. He froze, straining his ears. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of hushed voices and hurried footsteps. His heart racing, Amphialus crept toward the source of the noise. As he rounded the corner, he caught a glimpse of a figure slipping into the shadows, a figure that looked suspiciously like one of the captive princesses. Had they found a way to escape, or was there a traitor in their midst? With his pulse pounding in his ears, Amphialus realized that the fragile balance he had been struggling to maintain was about to shatter. The coming dawn would bring with it challenges he could scarcely imagine, and he knew that the choices he made in the next few moments would shape not only his fate, but the fate of the entire kingdom. The kingdom, once peaceful and idyllic, now buzzed with a frantic energy. Word of the crisis had reached every corner of the land, shattering the tranquil atmosphere that had long prevailed. The air itself seemed charged with tension, as if the very trees and stones could sense the impending conflict. King Basilius felt the weight of his crown more acutely than ever before. Gone were the days of lazy afternoons spent listening to shepherds' songs. Now the melody of his realm was the harsh clanging of armor and the thunderous hoofbeats of an army on the march. His face, once relaxed and carefree, now bore the lines of worry and determination. With a heavy heart but unwavering resolve, Basilius rallied his forces. The Arcadian army assembled before him, a sea of glinting steel and fluttering banners that stretched as far as the eye could see. The air filled with the scent of leather and metal, mingling with the nervous sweat of soldiers preparing for battle. Among the ranks, two figures stood out like beacons of hope, Pericles and Musidorus. The young men had shed their elaborate disguises, standing tall and proud in their true identities as princes. Their armor gleamed in the sunlight, a stark contrast to the grim determination etched on their faces. As they approached Basilius, the crowd parted like water around stones. The king's eyes widened slightly, a mix of surprise and gratitude flickering across his features. Pericles spoke, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Your Majesty, we offer our swords and our lives in service of rescuing the princesses." Basilius nodded solemnly, his throat tight with emotion. He clasped their hands, feeling the strength and resolve in their grip. "May the gods be with us," he murmured, his words carrying on the wind to the assembled troops. The march to Cecropia's castle was arduous, each step bringing them closer to conflict. The landscape seemed to mirror their journey, growing more rugged and forbidding as they advanced. Trees gave way to jagged rocks, and gentle hills became steep inclines that left men breathless and horses lathered with sweat. As they crested a final ridge, the fortress loomed before them, a dark blot against the sky. Perched atop a steep hill, it resembled a monstrous bird of prey ready to strike. Its thick walls seemed to mock the approaching army, a challenge etched in stone that whispered of the bloodshed to come. Inside those impenetrable walls, Amphialus paced restlessly. His footsteps echoed off the cold stone, matching the frantic beating of his heart. He was a man torn in two, duty pulling him one way and desire another. With each passing moment, the weight of his command pressed down upon him like a physical force. "Reinforce the eastern wall," he barked, his voice sharp with tension. "Double the archers on the ramparts." His orders rang out, each one a desperate attempt to prepare for the inevitable assault. The siege began with a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Days bled into weeks, the passage of time marked only by the rhythm of attack and counterattack. The air grew thick with the acrid smell of smoke and the metallic tang of blood. The ground beneath the castle walls became a patchwork of scarlet and brown, a grim testament to the lives lost in each skirmish. Pericles and Musidorus were like twin comets streaking across the battlefield. Their swords flashed in the sunlight, a deadly dance that inspired awe in their allies and terror in their foes. Where they went, the tide of battle turned. The Arcadian troops, bolstered by the prince's unwavering courage, fought with renewed vigor, their battle cries echoing off the castle walls. Within those very walls, a different kind of battle raged. Pamela and Philoclea, their faces pale but eyes burning with determination, became the unseen heroes of the siege. They moved like ghosts through the castle, their ears straining for any scrap of information that might aid their rescuers. In shadowy corners and behind heavy tapestries, they pieced together fragments of overheard conversations, searching for any weakness in Cecropia's iron grip. Zelmane, still cloaked in his disguise, was a shadow among shadows. Every step was a risk, every conversation a dance on the edge of a knife. His heart raced with each close call, the fear of discovery a constant companion. Yet he pressed on, driven by an unwavering devotion to protect the princesses and find a path to freedom. As the siege dragged on, resources dwindled on both sides. Inside the castle, the air grew stale and heavy with the stench of fear and desperation. Food became scarce, and water was rationed with increasing strictness. Outside, the Arcadian army's spirits wavered like a candle in the wind. Faces once bright with determination now bore the haggard look of prolonged struggle. The song of battle was replaced by the groans of the wounded and the quiet sobs of those who had lost hope. It was in this crucible of conflict that a plan was born. Pericles and Musidorus, their armor dented and their bodies weary but their resolve unbroken, stepped forward. "We will lead a final assault," Pericles declared, his voice carrying across the hushed camp. "A strike at the heart of the castle to end this siege once and for all." The air thrummed with tension as they prepared. Each man and woman in the army knew that the coming dawn could bring either glorious victory or crushing defeat. Weapons were sharpened, armor was mended, and quiet prayers were whispered to gods both old and new. As the first light of a new day painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, the two princes stood at the head of their forces. The castle walls loomed before them, a challenge and a promise. With a shared look of grim determination, they raised their swords high. "For Arcadia!" Musidorus roared, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "For freedom!" Pericles echoed, the sun glinting off his blade. As one, the army surged forward, a wave of steel and flesh crashing against the unyielding stone of the castle. The final battle had begun, and with it, the fate of a kingdom hung in the balance. The air filled with the clash of steel and the cries of the wounded, a symphony of chaos that would determine the future of Arcadia. In that moment, as arrows darkened the sky and the first ladders struck the castle walls, a single thought echoed through the minds of all who fought: victory or death. There would be no middle ground in this, the final desperate gambit to end the siege and rescue the princesses. The die was cast, and the future of a kingdom would be decided in the blood and fury of the coming hours. The final assault on Cecropia's castle loomed before them, a pivotal moment in the siege. It was here, amidst the chaos and clamor of battle, that the tide would turn, as Pericles and Musidorus led their chosen warriors towards the formidable walls. The air crackled with tension, thick and heavy like a storm about to break. Sweat trickled down the faces of the small band of fighters as they approached the outer defenses, their hearts pounding in their chests. The acrid smell of smoke mingled with the metallic tang of blood, a grim reminder of the cost of their endeavor. Pericles stood at the forefront, his golden hair catching the dying light of the setting sun. He looked like a figure from legend, his eyes blazing with determination. Raising his sword high, he cried out, "For Arcadia!" His voice carried over the din of battle, igniting a spark of hope in the hearts of his comrades. With a thunderous crash that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth, their battering ram struck the gates. Once, twice, 3 times it swung, each impact sending tremors through the ground beneath their feet. On the 4th strike, the wood splintered with a sickening crack. A roar of triumph erupted from the attackers as they poured through the breach like a tidal wave, their weapons glinting ominously in the fading light. Inside the castle, chaos reigned supreme. The clash of steel on steel filled the air, a cacophony of violence punctuated by shouts of triumph and cries of pain. The stone walls seemed to amplify every sound, creating a deafening symphony of battle. Pyrocles and Musidorus fought side by side, their movements a deadly dance of precision and power. Sweat glistened on their brows as they cut through the defenders, their blades flashing like lightning. Their eyes met briefly in the midst of the fray, a silent understanding passing between them. They had come too far to fail now. As if drawn by the hand of fate itself, the 2 princes found themselves face to face with Amphialus in a grand corridor. The air seemed to still, the sounds of battle fading to a distant roar as the 3 warriors sized each other up. Amphialus stood before them, his face a mask of grim determination. He raised his sword in salute, the gesture both respectful and menacing. "Let us end this," he said, his voice low and dangerous, barely above a whisper, yet carrying clearly to their ears. What followed was a duel of epic proportions, a clash of skill and will that would be remembered for generations. Swords flashed like lightning, the ring of metal on metal echoing off the stone walls with each furious exchange. Pyrocles and Musidorus moved in perfect harmony, their years of friendship and shared battles evident in every coordinated strike. Yet Amphialus held his own against their onslaught, his blade a blur of motion as he parried and countered with incredible speed. Meanwhile, in a distant part of the castle, Philoclea and Pamela seized their chance for freedom. The princesses' hearts raced as they slipped from their chambers, aided by servants who had long harbored sympathy for their plight. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential captor, every distant sound a threat to their escape. "This way," Philoclea whispered urgently, tugging her sister's hand as they ducked behind a heavy tapestry. They held their breath as a group of soldiers rushed past, the sisters' bodies tense with fear and hope. The cool stone against their backs was a stark contrast to the warmth of their clasped hands, a reminder of the bond that had sustained them through their captivity. As the battle raged on, Cecropia found her carefully laid plans crumbling around her. The once proud woman now looked wild-eyed and desperate, her composure shattered like the gates of her fortress. "Fight, you fools!" she screamed, her voice hoarse with fury and fear. "I will not be defeated." But her words fell on deaf ears, lost in the chaos of the battle. The tide had turned, and her defenders were overwhelmed by the sheer determination of their attackers. In a final, desperate stand, Cecropia herself took up arms, her movements frantic and uncoordinated. But it was too late. She was surrounded, disarmed, and taken captive, her reign of terror finally at an end. As the dust settled and the last pockets of resistance were quelled, a wave of jubilation swept through the castle. The air, once thick with the sounds of battle, now rang with cheers of victory. In the great hall, a touching scene unfolded that brought tears to the eyes of even the hardest warriors. Philoclea and Pamela, their faces streaked with tears of joy, rushed into the arms of their parents. King Basilius and Queen Ganesha held their daughters close, their own eyes glistening with emotion. The warmth of their embrace seemed to chase away the chill of fear and separation that had haunted them for so long. Yet even as they reveled in their reunion, a new tension filled the air. Pyrocles and Musidorus, still breathless from battle, knew that the time for truth had come. With heavy hearts they stepped forward, their disguises no longer necessary, the weight of their deception pressed down on them, a burden they could no longer bear. "Your Majesty," Pyrocles began, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart, we have not been entirely honest with you." And so they revealed their true identities to the stunned Arcadian court, their words falling like thunderbolts in the suddenly silent hall. The revelation sent shock waves through the assembly. Philoclea and Pamela stared at the men they had come to love, their minds struggling to reconcile the personas of Zelman and Doris with these newly revealed princes. Confusion, hurt, and a glimmer of hope warred in their eyes, their emotions as turbulent as a storm-tossed sea. King Basilius and Queen Ganesha, too, found themselves grappling with a maelstrom of emotions. The web of deception that had entangled them all now lay bare, leaving them to confront the true nature of their recent experiences and relationships. The air in the hall grew thick with unspoken questions and barely contained feelings. As the captives were freed and the immediate dangers passed, a new challenge loomed before them all. The time had come to navigate the aftermath of their deceptions, to confront the raw emotions that had been stirred, and to determine the path forward. In the wake of victory, they found themselves facing perhaps their greatest test yet, the test of truth, forgiveness, and love. The royal party, flushed with the success of their recent rescue, began preparations to return to the capital. Their spirits soared as they anticipated a triumphant homecoming, the air buzzing with excitement and relief. Yet as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the liberated castle, a chill wind swept through the courtyard. It carried with it a sense of foreboding, a whisper of dangers yet to come. Unbeknownst to the celebrating victors, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising storms that would test their newfound peace to its very limits. The royal party, flushed with the success of their recent rescue, prepared to return to the capital. Their spirits soared as they anticipated a triumphant homecoming, unaware of the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The palace hummed with anticipation, a beehive of activity as servants scurried about, their arms laden with platters and decorations. The air was thick with the aroma of roasting meats and freshly baked bread, mingling with the sweet scent of blooming flowers adorning every corner. Laughter echoed through the halls, punctuated by the melodious strains of lutes and harps tuning up for the evening's entertainment. King Basilius stood at the heart of it all, his silver beard gleaming in the warm light of countless candles. His eyes twinkled with pride as he surveyed his court, a sea of colorful silks and glittering jewels. The king's weathered hands, strong despite his years, gripped the arms of his throne, a symbol of the stability he had brought to Arcadia. Yet amid the joyous preparations, a seed of chaos had been planted. In a quiet corner of the palace, a figure hunched over a small vial, their trembling hands carefully measuring drops of a shimmering liquid. This was no ordinary concoction, but a love potion of tremendous potency intended for the enigmatic Zelmane. The creator's heart raced with anticipation, blind to the disaster their misguided passion would soon unleash. As night fell, the great hall blazed with light and laughter. Courtiers twirled in intricate dances, their jewels catching the light like stars brought down to earth. The air was electric with excitement, a palpable energy that seemed to make even the stone walls of the palace come alive. King Basilius rose, his ornate goblet held high. The golden cup caught the light, sending dazzling reflections dancing across the faces of his subjects. With a hearty laugh that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hall, he brought the cup to his lips and drank deeply. In that moment, time seemed to slow. The king's eyes widened, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Then, like a mighty oak felled by a woodsman's axe, he collapsed. The thud of his body hitting the floor was like a thunderclap, silencing the music and laughter in an instant. "The king! The king has fallen!" The cry tore through the stunned silence, a jagged bolt of fear that set hearts racing. The once merry hall erupted into chaos, a maelstrom of panic and confusion. Courtiers pressed forward, their finery now a hindrance as they jostled for a glimpse of their fallen monarch. Fingers, some adorned with rings worth a farmer's yearly harvest, pressed against the king's neck, searching desperately for a pulse. They found only cold, unyielding flesh, as still and lifeless as the marble statues that lined the palace gardens. In the midst of the turmoil, a whisper began to circulate, growing louder with each passing moment. Eyes turned to Queen Gynecia, who stood frozen, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Someone recalled seeing her near the king's cup earlier in the evening, and in the fear and confusion, suspicion quickly turned to accusation. "Seize the queen!" The order cut through the din like a sword through silk. Guards moved forward, their armor clanking ominously in the sudden hush that fell over the crowd. Ganesia's protests, raw and desperate, fell on deaf ears as she was led away, her silk gown trailing behind her like a banner of fallen glory. Princesses Pamela and Philoclea clung to each other, islands of stillness in a sea of chaos. Pamela's face was a study in shock, her usual poise shattered by the unthinkable turn of events. Beside her, Philoclea sobbed uncontrollably, her slender frame shaking with each ragged breath. The sisters, once the jewels of the court, now seemed small and vulnerable, children lost in a storm of adult fears and ambitions. Pericles and Musidorus, the valiant princes who had played such crucial roles in recent events, found themselves torn between duty and love. Their hearts ached for the princesses, yet they knew they must help maintain order. They moved through the crowd like ships navigating treacherous waters, their voices raised in an attempt to calm the panicked masses. As night deepened, the palace became a hive of whispered conversations and furtive glances. In shadowy corners and torchlit alcoves, nobles gathered in small groups, their heads bent close as they debated the future of Arcadia. Loyalties were weighed, alliances considered and discarded like ill-fitting garments. Beyond the palace walls, the news spread like wildfire, carried on the wind to the farthest corners of the kingdom. In neighboring lands, rulers leaned over maps, their eyes gleaming with the light of opportunity. Arcadia, once a bastion of stability, now seemed ripe for the taking. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Arcadia stood on the brink of an abyss. The future, once so certain, now hung by a thread as thin and fragile as a spider's silk. In bedchambers and council rooms, in taverns and marketplaces, one question echoed. What would become of Arcadia? Little did they know, as the new day dawned, that the true test of their kingdom was yet to come. For in the shadows, unseen and unheard, forces were already in motion that would shake Arcadia to its very foundations. The death of King Basilius cast a dark shadow over Arcadia. The kingdom plunged into a state of political upheaval, uncertainty gripping the hearts of its people. As news of the ruler's demise spread like wildfire through the land, a sense of urgency swept through every corner of the realm. The air itself seemed to thicken with tension, carrying whispers of fear and speculation on the breeze. In response to the crisis, a court was hastily assembled in the grand hall of the palace. Once a place of joyous celebration and royal decrees, the hall now stood as a solemn chamber of judgment. The usual warmth of the room had been replaced by a chill that seemed to seep from the very stones. Ornate tapestries depicting Arcadia's glorious history hung on the walls, their vibrant threads now muted in the somber atmosphere, as if the figures woven into them were watching the proceedings with silent disapproval. Nobles, advisors, and common folk alike filed into the hall, their footsteps echoing ominously in the cavernous space. The scent of fear and anticipation mingled with the musty smell of old stone and polished wood. Faces etched with worry and curiosity turned towards the center of the room, where the fate of the kingdom would be decided. At the heart of this storm stood Pericles and Musidorus, once hidden behind the elaborate facades of Zelman and Doris. Now stripped of their disguises, they faced the full weight of their deceptions. The young men's shoulders sagged under the burden of their actions, their eyes darting nervously around the room as they felt the piercing gazes of the assembled crowd. As the trial commenced, each character was called forth to testify. The air crackled with tension, a force so palpable it seemed to press down on all present. Hearts raced, palms sweated, and breaths were held as each person approached the stand, their words painting a vivid picture of the tangled web that had led to this moment. Philoclea, the younger princess, approached with trepidation. Her delicate frame seemed to tremble as she took her place, her voice quavering as she began to speak. "I love not a disguise, but the person beneath," she declared, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Can the heart be faulted for recognizing its other half, even when hidden behind a mask?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion, as the court absorbed the raw honesty of her confession. Pamela, the elder princess, followed her sister. Where Philoclea had been fragile, Pamela was steel. She stood tall, her chin lifted in defiance as she gave her account. Her testimony rang out clear and strong, a fierce defense of love's ability to transcend societal boundaries. Yet beneath her strength, a hint of regret colored her words, acknowledging the necessity of their deceptions. The crowd listened, captivated by the passion in her voice, a stark contrast to the cold stone walls surrounding them. Queen Ganesha's turn came, and the room fell into a hushed silence. The rustle of her gown against the floor was the only sound as she approached the stand, her regal bearing intact despite the cloud of suspicion hanging over her. Her defense was not just of her actions, but of her very soul. I have loved deeply, suffered silently, and now stand before you, bearing the truth of my heart, she proclaimed, her voice ringing clear and strong. Judge me not by the whispers of suspicion, but by the truth of my words and the integrity of my actions. Her words seemed to resonate off the walls, challenging anyone to doubt her sincerity. The trial progressed like a tempestuous sea, each testimony a wave crashing against the shores of truth and justice. Amphialus, the conflicted kidnapper, stood before the court, his proud bearing now humbled by the weight of his actions. His testimony spoke of inner turmoil, of love twisted into obsession, and of the redemptive power of self-reflection. As he spoke, the crowd could almost see the battle raging within him, his words painting a picture of a man torn between desire and honor. As hidden truths came to light, the atmosphere in the court grew thick with revelation. Each character was forced to confront the consequences of their actions, their carefully constructed worlds of illusion crumbling around them. The judges, tasked with unraveling this complex tapestry of love, duty, and deception, listened intently, their brows furrowed in concentration. The weight of their responsibility seemed to press down on their shoulders, visible in the deep lines etched on their faces. The court grappled with profound questions that seemed to echo off the stone walls. How does one judge intention against action? Where does the line between love and duty lie? And in a world where disguises and deceptions run rampant, what is the true nature of truth itself? These questions hung in the air, unanswered as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the hall. As darkness fell, the fate of Arcadia hung in the balance. The judges retreated to deliberate, leaving the assembled crowd in a state of anxious anticipation. The air in the hall grew thick and heavy, filled with unspoken fears and desperate hopes. In this moment of suspended time, each person present felt the weight of history upon them, knowing that the verdict to come would shape the future of their beloved kingdom for generations to come. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, a commotion erupted outside the courtroom. The sound of raised voices and hurried footsteps grew louder, drawing nearer to the hall. Suddenly, the heavy doors burst open, and a figure stepped through, silhouetted against the torchlight from the corridor. As the figure moved into the light, gasps of shock and disbelief rippled through the crowd. For there, very much alive and awake from his potion-induced slumber, stood King Basilius himself. A commotion erupted outside the courtroom, bringing the trial to a sudden halt. To everyone's astonishment, King Basilius entered, very much alive and awake from his potion-induced slumber. The air in the room seemed to crystallize, a palpable tension freezing every breath and movement. All eyes turned to the figure in the doorway, a collective gasp rippling through the assembly. Basilius stood tall, his regal bearing unchanged despite his recent ordeal. His eyes, clear and alert, swept across the stunned faces before him, a mix of confusion, relief, and fear etched on each countenance. The courtroom, moments ago a cauldron of accusation and despair, fell into a shocked silence. The only sound was the soft rustle of fabric as Queen Ganesha took a hesitant step towards her husband, her face a canvas of conflicting emotions. Relief warring with disbelief, joy battling with uncertainty. Basilius's voice, strong and commanding, shattered the silence like a stone through glass. "Let there be an end to these accusations and recriminations," he declared, his words echoing off the stone walls and seeming to reverberate in the very bones of those present. As the king began to recount his experience under the potion's influence, the courtroom hung on his every word. His voice, tinged with a newfound vulnerability, painted a vivid picture of a twilight state, aware yet paralyzed, conscious yet unable to respond. The frustration and helplessness in his tone evoked a wave of sympathy, even from those who had doubted him most. With each revelation, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The heavy cloud of suspicion and fear that had hung over the proceedings began to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of wonder and relief. Faces that had been etched with worry now softened, some even breaking into tentative smiles. As understanding dawned, it was as if a veil had been lifted from their eyes. The princess's flight, far from being an act of rebellion, was revealed as a surrender to the irresistible current of love. Basilius's supposed adultery dissolved into a moment of mistaken identity with his own wife, and the prophecy that had seemed so ominous now revealed itself in unexpected, almost whimsical ways. Basilius, his eyes twinkling with newfound wisdom, turned his attention to the young couples. His gaze rested on Pericles and Philoclea, then Musidorus and Pamela, a warmth in his expression that spoke volumes. "Love," he said, his voice rich with emotion, "has been the author of our recent trials, and it shall be the foundation of our future joy. I give you my blessing." The princesses' faces lit up like the dawn breaking over Arcadia's rolling hills, their joy radiating through the room. Pericles and Musidorus stood tall, their postures reflecting both relief and pride. The love that had driven them to such lengths was now acknowledged and celebrated, rather than condemned. In a moment that seemed to hold its breath, Amphialus, the proud warrior whose actions had caused so much strife, approached the king. His face, once set in defiance, now showed genuine remorse. Basilius, in a gesture that spoke volumes of his growth, extended a hand of forgiveness. As Amphialus rose, reconciled with the royal family, it was as if a great weight had been lifted from the room, allowing everyone to breathe freely once more. However, not all endings were joyous. Cecropia, the true architect of Arcadia's recent troubles, faced the consequences of her actions. Her exile was pronounced with a mixture of justice and mercy, a decision that seemed to satisfy even those who had suffered most from her schemes. As she was led away, there was a collective sense of a chapter closing, of wounds beginning to heal. As the dust settled on this tumultuous chapter in Arcadia's history, a palpable sense of peace and renewal swept through the land. The royal family, along with Pericles and Musidorus, made their way back to the capital. Their journey was marked by joyous celebrations, the people of Arcadia lining the streets to welcome their returned king and the newly united couples. The procession moved through the countryside like a river of hope, promising a new era of prosperity and harmony. Flowers rained down from windows, children danced in the streets, and the air was filled with song and laughter. As they approached the capital, the sun setting behind them cast long shadows ahead, as if pointing the way to a brighter future. In the fading light, Basilius looked at his family. At Ganesha, her face softened by forgiveness and renewed love. At Philoclea and Pamela, radiant in their happiness. At Pericles and Musidorus, standing tall and proud beside their beloveds. He felt a swell of emotion in his chest, a mixture of gratitude, love, and hope for the future. As they passed through the gates of the capital, cheers erupted from the gathered crowds. Basilius raised his hand in greeting, a smile on his face that spoke of lessons learned and wisdom gained. Arcadia stood on the threshold of a new chapter, one filled with the promise of love, wisdom, and unity. The trials they had faced had forged them into something stronger, something more resilient. And as the stars began to twinkle in the deepening twilight, there was a sense that this was not an ending, but a beautiful new beginning.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.